We are today going to talk about the 7 creepiest creatures of the deep. So at number 7, we have the leaf fish. So I imagine it's probably something to do with camouflage in this fish.
Yes, the one I want to talk about is the one I came across in Sulawesi, muck diving. I almost accidentally filmed these in passing, and then I sort of looked back at the footage later and thought, they're weird. And it was the cockatoo wasp fish, or leaf fish. They look like a giant leaf. They're about 2 feet long, and they've got a very big crest. And they come often in pairs, so when there's one around, there's often another one in the vicinity. And sure enough, another one turned up halfway through this little clip I've got. Of course, they're pretending to be bits of debris, and hopefully not being noticed either by their prey or by potential predators. They've also got spiny, venomous dorsal fins, although they're not very aggressive. They sort of lie flopping passively on the seabed.
Okay, so that was the leaf fish at number 7, and camouflage is generally a good strategy in nature. At number 6, we have the cookie cutter shark. Now, cookie is an American term for biscuit, as we call it here in the UK. So I guess in the UK we could call it the biscuit cutter shark. What's that all about?
So yes, this one is a bit of a nightmare because it'll take a chunk of your flesh out of you. In fact, some open ocean swimmers have had cookie cutter shark bites. It's a dogfish type shark. Often living in open and perhaps sometimes deep water. And it has a mouth which looks like it's got a bit of a bandsaw in it. It's also got some big rubbery lips around that saw, so it's got a sucker. They come in shoals of 20 or 30 apparently. And in some places in the world, like Hawaii, all the dolphins have got cookie cutter shark bites on them, so they're quite common. So it's quite stealthy. And it comes up to the dolphin and grabs on, sucks its mouth onto the dolphin, and then uses this kind of bandsaw sharp rows of teeth and twists out a little chunk of flesh, and you can see these little round marks about the size of a jam jar lid, and so quite a substantial bite.
And again, quite a good strategy, because it doesn't have to kill its prey to eat it. It just has to find something sufficiently big to go in and take a chunk out of it, and then often chomp.
Yes, you've got to wonder about nature, haven't you? How every single idea that's possible to exploit has been exploited, and this is an example of it. You've got to admire it, even though it's really creepy.
Well, one of the creepiest on your list of top 7 creepiest creatures of the deep, John, is this next one, the Barreleye fish. I've had a look at some images of that, and I think the human equivalent of this fish would be if we got a saw and were able to take the skull cap off our own human skulls from the eye orbit off and replace it with a glass equivalent. That is what this fish looks like. It basically has a glass skull. You can see everything that's going on inside.
Yes, that is a creepy thought, but you're absolutely right. That's what it is. It's a deep sea fish, and like a lot of deep sea creatures, it's got its eyes developed to make best use of the little amount of light that there is there. There's 2 forms of light there. There's the light coming from the surface, the downwelling light. But more interestingly is what's called bioluminescence, which is the biological light that's made by most of the fish down there and many of the invertebrates. And it's very important because it allows you to find your prey, because anything that's flashing might be potential prey. And it also allows you to find your mates. So being tuned into that bioluminescent light is really important for any animal that lives there, and this is the supreme example of a fish that's adapted to do that. Inside that jelly head, there are 2 tubes, and those tubes are usually looking upwards towards the surface. They have yellow or green filters in them, which takes out a lot of the downwelling light. And then why would you want to do that? To better see the bioluminescence is the answer. So really very good adaptations in those eyes. And not only do they have lenses at the top of those tubes, on the side of those tubes is a mirror. And it's one of the few eyes in vertebrates that has a mirror to collect the light.
Yep.
Well, yes, and also they've recently found that it can focus it. By the way, those two little black dots at the front are its nose, not its eyes, which are those green things we're talking about. So it's got the best of both worlds. It's got these acute eyes, and they're pretty good, but only got a narrow field of view. And it's also got the side eyes, which are picking up any little bit of bioluminescence. It's probably a sit-and-wait predator. The adults have very flat pectoral fins, which is thought to keep them steady in the water. And so it's probably just sitting there a lot of the time, just looking with these wonderful eyes it's got.
Okay, number 5, the barrelfish, also called the spook fish. Now we know why. Number 4 is a giant ostracod. What's an ostracod?
Yes, you may well ask. There's things in the sea which we just don't really have any sort of way to describe because we don't usually see them on land. They're a group of their own, and normally they're about 2 millimeters, so they're quite small. But there's one called the giant ostracod, which is about maybe 3 centimeters, which is massive as far as ostracods go, and it lives in the deep. And again, it's got these extraordinary eye structures. You can see through it. It's semi-transparent. I don't know, it's extraordinary. It's like a giant orange pea with 2 car headlamps inside it, and it's got 2 little filaments, which is the thing that it moves with. And you can see filaments flicking, and then it tumbles as it goes through the water. It's thought that those eyes are catching a very wide range of light. And a reflecting element like that, a mirror sort of element, is better than a lens for getting the minute amounts of light that it needs to see down there. And again, it's looking for bioluminescence. They're quite predatory. It eats small fish and things, even though you wouldn't expect something that size to be doing that.
Okay, well, we're moving slowly towards your number 1 creepiest creature. And now at number 3 we have the prambug, and I was just doing a bit of research on this morning, and I want to give you a quote. It's called, by one scientist, a nasty deep-sea amphipod that carves its home from the guts of an unfortunate salp.
Yes, it's thought that perhaps it was the inspiration for the alien drawings in the film Alien that was designed by H.R. Geiger, the famous illustrator, who died a couple of years ago. But H.R. Geiger's drawings of aliens look very similar to Pheronema, the prambug amphipod, which you've just described. It does an extraordinary thing. It uses the shell of a salp. Salps are, again, another creature which we're not familiar with. They're related to sea squirts, tunicates, but they're floating free in the water, and they can be tens of feet long. They're with hundreds of segments.
Masses, aren't they, John?
They are, but they're made up of segments, and what the prambug has done is to cut out one of the segments, which must be about maybe 3 or 4 centimeters long, and they're like little barrels, the segments, and then it's gone inside this animal, it's eaten out the insides, so it just wants the barrel of this salp. And so why does it do that? It's thought that perhaps that is a more efficient way to travel through the water inside this tube, and it's not using as much energy. A lot of the relatives of this particular amphipod, which is a type of crustacean, I think, isn't it, are found on the seabed. Because it's less energetic to travel around on the seabed. But if you want to find different food and more food, you might want to travel up into the water column. But if you do that, it's going to cost more energy to swim around. This thing has found a way to get around that by stealing the segments of a salp, which is quite extraordinary.
So it's a clever strategy. But why called the prambug? Is it something to do with babies?
Yes. So what happens is that, like Alien, again, this is where the parallel with the film Alien is, where the parasites go inside and eat you. It goes inside the salp, eats it out, and then lays its eggs inside. The female lays her eggs inside, and they develop inside this segment. And you can see lots of little babies inside. And it's pushing it around, presumably giving nice oxygenated current over the eggs too. So there's some other benefits there. But the males are also found inside the salps, so it's not entirely to do with laying the eggs in, although that's very helpful. It's in fact, if you were to be strict about it, it's a parasitoid rather than a parasite, because parasitoids are things that kill off their host. And of course, it's killed off the salp, and it's just using an element of the salp. Although apparently some of the salp tissue is still alive, which is a bit creepy.
But the salp, in effect, becomes like a giant pram nursery carrying lots of eggs of this particular prambug.
Yes, well, what you see is this alien-like creature, which looks like a big shrimp inside, and it's got its tail hanging out of the back of this barrel, and that's how it pushes it along. It flaps its legs and its tail and pushes the whole thing through the water. And it is just like it's taking a pram with all its developing young inside.
Okay, at number 2 we have the anglerfish, and I think people will generally be aware of anglerfish because in a lot of countries now the anglerfish is quite a tasty fish to eat. But it has about 18 different families. There are notions all over the world, John. I'm sure you filmed them.
Yeah, I think the edible one you're talking about is the monkfish, which is from the Atlantic and the North Sea, and that's a shallow water species. There's shallow and deep water species. There's ones that live on the seabed in the deep water as well, and there's ones that live in the mid-water. In fact, the majority, I think, live on the seabed, and there's some bizarre ones down in the deep. There's even one that doesn't have a rod. It's got a patch which makes a smell, presumably, that prey come to. And then it gobbles them up. But there are some really bizarre ones down there. And actually one of the ones that we all think of as the anglerfish is a midwater species. It's called the black devilfish, which is a dramatic name. The humpback devilfish is another name. Johnson's angler. But basically it's the one that was in Nemo, the big scary one.
Well, they've giant mouths, giant teeth, and they generally keep it shut until something comes close to the lure. Isn't that right? Isn't that the way they work?
Yes, that's exactly how it works. And I think there must be something in our sort of psyche that loves them, because children love them, I know. This lovely bright light dangling in the water, and it looks enticing, so you go towards it and then you see the teeth behind it. So it's the kind of beauty and the thrill and the horror of it as well. They're related to frogfish, which I've also filmed, and frogfish have got the same sort of trick, but often in much shallower water. I've seen some that look like orange sponges, and you go up to them and you'd think they were a sponge, but actually then you look closely and you can see that they're dangling a lure above their mouths, just like the deep-sea anglerfish. And if you stare at them too long, they leave the seabed, they get a bit self-conscious and they start bouncing along until they find somewhere else.
A big drum roll, John, because we've now reached the number one at the top in your list of the creepiest creatures of the deep, and that in fact is a thing called the vampire squid. And I'm assuming it's not because it has sharp, blood-curdling canine teeth, but tell us about it.
Well, why is it called a vampire? I mean, I guess the whole deep sea is almost vampirish, isn't it? Because it's in the dark and it's strange and mysterious and creepy. And this is perhaps the master of the deep sea. It looks like an octopus, and I think it was confused with the octopus. I think it's somewhere in between squid and octopus in a group of its own. It's got lots of membranes between its tentacles, like the cape of a vampire. And when it gets threatened, it can pull this cape over itself, a bit like a hedgehog crawls up into a ball, but it's quite dramatic when it happens. It's got this big red eye, which is again vampire-like, and it's got claws between the tentacles. A lot of these things in the deep sea, we have to kind of imagine what they might be doing. We've got a few clues, like the claws, so presumably it's latching onto something. A lot of squid and octopus have got feeding tentacles, and this species doesn't have them. But what it does have is like these thin web-like strands, and it's thought that those catch maybe little shrimps and things like that. But you've really got to get down there to have a look at these things, and the trouble is that if you go down there with a submarine, you usually have big lights and the submarine's engines make a lot of noise, and of course these animals are tuned into the slightest bit of light and the slightest bit of noise, and so you go there with a submarine, you're not going to get anywhere near them, and you're certainly not going to see them doing natural things. And then the alternative to that is trying to fish for them, and of course if you bring them up in a net, then you damage them. And in fact, I've got some shots here which are of caught vampire squids, and they're beautiful, but unfortunately they've got damaged by the net. They're very, very delicate, and they don't last very long. So it's a real tricky thing trying to see anything in the deep. I mean, to see any natural behaviour.
Why is it now that you have chosen this as your number one creepiest creature of the deep?
It's probably because it is a true vampire. It looks the part. It's got its red eye, its black cloak, it's got the claws, and it's found in the deep, dark depths, and it doesn't like sunlight.